morning, guys. Thank you for joining this quiet time. I just wanted to share with you what I've been reading so far in the book of Jonah. So we can just go ahead and get started in chapter 1. We'll start in verse 2. And what's happening is the Lord is speaking to Jonah. So verse 2, it reads, "Go to the great city of Nineveh and preach against it, because its wickedness has come up before me." But Jonah ran away from the Lord and headed for Tarshish. He went down to Joppa, where he found a ship bound for that port. After paying that far, he went aboard and sailed for Tarshish to flee from the Lord. So what really stands out to me is, what's happening is that God chooses, of all people, he chooses Jonah to preach to the city of Nineveh because of the wickedness, because of, the bad things that are going on in that city. And God chooses Jonah to go preach to them. And what really gets to me is that Jonah's reaction immediately is to run away from God. It's to avoid the situation. And what he does is he doesn't tell God to choose someone else, but just completely avoids the situation and tries to do what he wants to do and goes his own way, runs away. And, the sin there I think of is just selfishness. He only cares for himself, whether it's, being afraid of preaching to people. Maybe he's insecure, or maybe he's just comfortable with living his lifestyle that he doesn't feel like going to preaching out to these other people. He has no fear for God, that he flat out just disobeys and rebels against what God calls him to do. So really he's blinded by the things that he wants to do, that he's not really thinking about the people of Nineveh. God is sending him there for a reason. He's sending him there so that these people can repent, so that they can, turn to God, because their life is at stake right now, and Jonah completely just chooses to disobey. So a question that I asked for myself is, when you're called to do something, do you get excited? Are you determined to make it great? Or do you run away like Jonah does and try to find a way out of it? And why? Do you understand that God's choosing you for a reason? Do you believe that God is choosing you for a reason? And if you don't see it right then, are you trusting in God? Or are you trusting on what you want and what you grew up believing? And so I think of just like everything that's been going on within the ministry, from doing ministry out in California, now being out here in Texas. The opportunity was presented to come out here and to build a ministry out here, and my immediate reaction was excitement, but then also a bit of just being a little bit of afraid, because I don't know, maybe I was just thinking of, I'm used to living in California. I'm used to living out there. I mean, I grew up there my entire life. I have family out there, and so coming out here, it kind of made me think of, am I willing to step outside of that and go into something that I don't know, like a whole new state? And I thought of Jonah here because, here this is God presenting an opportunity. He's calling me to come out here, and I can either choose to go, or I can choose to stay behind and miss on the opportunity that God is presenting to me. And I think of, just like in the city of Nineveh, there's people out here in Texas, that need God, who, need to be preached the truth. And, that's kind of just something that I related to it, because just like that, I don't want to have a heart that Jonah had, but a heart that is completely obedient to God and wants to do that for the sake of other people. Let's continue reading. Verses 4 to 5. It says, "Then the Lord sent a great wind on sea and such a violent storm across such a violent storm arose that the ship threatened to break up. All the sailors were afraid, and each cried out to his own God, and they threw the cargo into the sea to lighten the ship. And basically what's happening here is, so Jonah runs away, and he aborts this ship, and what then happens is God sends a great storm, and not only does Jonah, so out of Jonah's rebellion, out of Jonah's own selfish desires, he aborts onto a ship, and it says that the men in the ship were terrified, that they cried out to their own gods. And I just think of, like, in this moment, no matter what, you can't run from God. You can try, you can do what you can. You can't avoid God. At some point in time, you know, it's going to catch up to you. You know, God will always be there, because what you're trying to avoid is something in your character. Like in this part here, Jonah, he's avoiding something in his character. It's, you know, whether it's insecurity, whether it's being afraid, whether it's selfishness. Yeah, like you can't ever run away from God. At some point in time, the issue is always going to come back to you. Like in this point here, Jonah's trying to avoid God, but God sends a great storm, and in all of that happening, not only, you know, he's thinking about himself, but he's also affecting the people around him. You know, like the sailors on the rest of the ship, and they're afraid that they start praying to their own God. And that's the question that I thought for myself is, you know, when you choose your own selfish desires, when you choose the sin over what you know is the right thing to do, the spiritual decision, are you thinking about the people around you and what it's going to lead to? Are you thinking about the other people, that it can possibly affect them too? And that's something that Jonah doesn't do here. And as a result of that, yeah, these guys on the ship, they're terrified. They're being affected by this great storm because of it. And yeah, these are the consequences, that he's not only putting his own life at risk, but he's putting the other people's life at risk. And that's the point there, is that sin will affect other people. Even if you don't think it will, it will. It will affect the people around you. It'll affect the ministry. It just trickles down. I think of also, like, you know, we can choose to avoid the situation that we don't want to do, or we can do it. We can trust in God and to do it. And I think of, you know, when Jesus died on the cross, you know, he chose to die on the cross. Even if he felt he didn't want to, he did it anyway, because he knew that it's what God wanted him to do. And in the end, you know, he does it. He doesn't just rely on his own strength, but he prays to God, and he has that close relationship with God. He prays to him. And a question I ask for myself is, are you relying on God or yourself? Are you doing things are you doing things based off your own strength, or are you doing things on God's strength? What is the end result of you doing what you wanted to do? Whose life are you affecting? And so we can continue reading. Verse 9 says, verse 7, so the great storm is happening, and what's happening here is Jonah, he's sleeping in the ship while this whole storm is happening. He doesn't really know, because he's in a deep sleep in the bottom of the ship. Verse 7, it says, then the sailors said to each other, come, Let us cast lots to find out who is responsible for this calamity. They cast lots, and the lot fell on Jonah. So they asked him, tell us, who is responsible for making all this trouble for us? What kind of work do you do? Where do you come from? What is your country? From what people are you? Then he answered, I am a Hebrew, and I worship the Lord, the God of heaven, who made the sea and the dry land. This terrified them, and they asked, what have you done? They knew he was running away from the Lord because he had already told them so. The sea was getting rougher and rougher, so they asked him, what should we do to you to make the sea calm down for us? And so I think of Jonah's sin here was rebellion, it's pride, because he knows that, he should, that he shouldn't be on this ship. He knows that the storm is happening because he disobeyed God, and he knows that, yet he chooses to, he's still trying to run away from God. And the sin there is rebellion, it's pride. So I think of, like in, basically when these guys, they're asking, what should we do? How do we calm the storm? They're panicking, they're afraid. The men in the ship are panicking, they're questioning Jonah, yet Jonah, he does not do as he should, which is to jump into the water. Instead, Jonah allows the men to find another way to try and calm and take over the boat. His reaction to God's storm should have been immediately trying to find a way to calm the storm by jumping into the water, but chose to wait. And there is, he's not caring about the other guys in the ship. He's still thinking about what he wants to do, versus what God wants him to do. So he's really trying to avoid what God is calling him to do. Then after they don't find another way, then Jonah then allows them to throw him into the sea. But just from the very beginning, Jonah knew he should have jumped into the boat. So a question I ask for myself is, when you know what you're supposed to do you do it? Or do you wait until something happens? Do you wait to be yelled at? Do you wait till you see that somebody else is affected by it, that then you step in? Do you wait, what are you waiting for? So basically what I'm just getting from this point here is, be obedient to God, stop rebelling. Sin will lead to more sin, and ultimately just not, that sin will lead you to another sin. It'll blind you, because that's what sin does. It's blinding, and it leads you completely in the wrong direction. It makes you make non-spiritual decisions, and it affects you, it affects the people around you, even if you don't feel it does. And so, just overall what I take from this quiet time is be obedient, understand that God is choosing you for a reason. So when you're faced in a situation, it's, when you don't know why, you just have to understand that, okay, God is choosing you for a reason. There's a reason. Even if you don't see it in that moment, God will reveal it to you at some point in time, and then he'll look back and say, oh wow, now I understand why. But you won't see it unless you take that leap of faith and you trust in God. So that's something that I really take from my quiet time, and I think about just being out here in Texas. During this whole pandemic, there's a lot going on. The coronavirus isn't gone yet, but I fully believe that God has sent us out here to start a ministry out here, because great things are going to happen. There's going to be new leaders rising up, and that's what I'm looking forward to, and that's why I'm excited to be here. And so, that's what I got for my quiet time.